Okay, so good morning and then welcome to our first lesson for this course, Studies in Shakespeare, EPS 251. In our first lesson, because we are studying Shakespeare, we would want to have a fair idea of who Shakespeare is, his works, and his life. Then we get to understand better the kind of personality that we are studying about. Okay, so in this presentation, we are basically going to have a look at who Shakespeare is, his works. So this is going to be our guideline for the course. Now, because of the pandemic, as we are all aware, this course is going to basically take place online. And then each time we're going to meet, we are supposed to read a relevant chapter or chapters for the course, and everyone is supposed to read. And then I also upload slides with some comments about the chapter every week we meet or before. Now you read the chapter before you look at the slides, otherwise it might be difficult to follow. In other words, you read ahead so that we all be at the same level ground. And to be obligatory weekly exercises. Some of the exercises will just be for you to comment, and then others will be asking you to do group work, others will ask you to come and make presentations. And then there will be timelines that will be given to you to submit them. So let's follow these strictly, and then like I said, post questions on open forum to help each other answer. So when it is open forum, it means that everybody must comment. Somebody makes a point, you either agree and tell us why you agree or why you disagree. It's very important. Now for this presentation particularly, we're going to look at the biography of William Shakespeare. Who is Shakespeare? And then there is something that we call Shakespeare lost years. What does it mean? Why are these years lost? What is the impact of Shakespeare's lost years on his life as an individual? And then the era and the works of Shakespeare. And then we'll end up by looking at understanding Shakespearean language. I'm sure those of you who have begun reading, you would have come across some new words that makes it very difficult, a bit challenging to really read and understand what Shakespeare writes. Okay. So we'll start by saying that William Shakespeare is widely regarded as one of the greatest writers in English language, and sometimes he's referred to as the father of English. Shakespeare was born on April 23rd, 1564 in Stratford upon Avon, and he happened to be the eldest son of John Shakespeare. So Shakespeare's father is actually called John, and the father was someone who made gloves. I mean, you know, gloves, what we used to wear on our hands. They say now with the pandemic, you should wear gloves. So his father was a prosperous glover and of local dignitary. I mean, within his community, he was one of those who was wealthy, revered. And Shakespeare's mother was also called Mary Arden, and he was the daughter of a wealthy farmer. So you can see from his background, he came from a very humble beginning. So Shakespeare's father John was a man without any formal education other than a few years in a public school. So basically you get the kind of background Shakespeare was born into, but of course it never pulled him down. And so his father made something of himself in the world through, although running his own business as a glove maker and becoming an elderman in the town, opinion leader in the Stratford upon Avon in Warwickshire. That is where they lived. So Shakespeare basically was born in a very humble beginning. And then probably Shakespeare's education is a bit shrouded in secrecy. There is no, he, like his father, looking at his background, he couldn't also go far in school. So research or data available shows that he probably attended Stratford Grammar School, where he would have learned basically some of the Greek and Latin literature, rhetorics, about people's speeches and why they make the speeches, the impact of public speaking, controlling your audience. And you also learn a bit about Christian ethics, very important during their time. And so Shakespeare left school in 1579 at the age of 15. So basically that is the point for at a very tender age, Shakespeare had already left school. He did not attend university and was not considered to be a truly learned man. That's how society perceived him because of where he comes from, his background, his beginning, the kind of family he is born into, make people to think that, well, once you did not go to the university, I mean, what is your worth? So that is a bit about Shakespeare. Now in 1582, that is 18 years old. So after he left school in 15, in 18 years, Shakespeare got married to his wife, Anna Hathaway, who was 8 years older than him. Well, I'm sure in modern time you'll find it to be strange, isn't it? Of course, it's been there. It's the issue of love. And then 6 months later, their daughter Susanna was born. So what does it give you? What clue does it give you? He married 18 years, and in 6 months, his first daughter, Susanna, was born. Find out what happened. What does this imply? What does it mean? And then after 2 years, that is 8 years later, 2 years after their marriage, he gave birth to twins, Hamlet and Judith. They both were female, so he got gave birth to two other children. So in all, you should know how many children Shakespeare has. Now, there are enough literature that suppose that Shakespeare was not really truly happy in his marriage. And why he was not happy, we are not privy to that because nobody really wrote about that. Nobody really said much about that, neither himself nor his very close friends. But there is a period in Shakespeare's life of 7 years from which no primary source about Shakespeare could be found. Nobody knew where he was, nobody knew what he was doing. There is nothing about Shakespeare's life within these 7 years, and that is from 1585 to 1592. And these 7 years of Shakespeare's life that is unaccounted for is what we refer to as Shakespeare's lost years. Now, there is much speculation about these lost years, which includes stories that Shakespeare was exiled from his homeland where he was born, Warwickshire, for deer stealing, hunting deers and stealing, and that he worked at the London playhouses holding horses for theatre goers. So from there he moved to London. So some of the literature will tell that within these 7 years, Shakespeare used to trek between Warwickshire, his homeland, and then London, and basically he was working at the theatre, the cinema houses, helping. I'm sure all these helped to sharpen his skills about literature, about play, about drama, about writing in general, because he had the opportunity to be exposed to so many performances at the theatre. Now, Shakespeare playwright journey, you know that he is a writer, and so we are told within the literature that between 1590 and 1613, Shakespeare wrote at least 37 plays and collaborated on several more. Collaboration, I hope you will understand. In modern times, you see musicians, you hear the circle there featuring so and so, this one so and so. So collaboration means that they were acting plays for money in those days. So Shakespeare helps people write their plays, and then they will share the profit, whatever comes out of it. So he has 17 comedies to his credit out of the 17, and some of these include The Merchant of Venice, a very nice book about love and wickedness. So that's what you learn about Portia, about Sherlock, about Antonio, and all of that. And then, of course, this book that we are reading is also one of his comedies, Much Ado About Nothing. I'm sure by now you have started reading and you see how interesting it is. Now, among he also has 10 history plays. So his books they are put into comedy, into history, and into tragedies. 3 trajectories. So comedies, history, and tragedy. So we have the comedy books of Shakespeare, we have the history books of Shakespeare, we have tragic books of Shakespeare. So he has 10 of them to his credit, and some of it are Henry V, Richard III, and so many more. And then some of his tragedies, among them are Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, Julius Caesar, name them. And of course, he also wrote 4 poems, and he also has a collection of sonnets to his credit, and we are going to study some of the sonnets this particular semester. And all these were published around 1609. Now, the last play that Shakespeare wrote as his farewell message to the stage was The Tempest. Very nice, interesting book about love and nature, and about wickedness and betrayal. So that was the last book that Shakespeare actually wrote before he went off the scene as a playwright. Now, performance of his plays, we are told that Shakespeare's plays began to be printed in 1594, probably within the same period that he was one. So if you go back, you realize that Shakespeare, from what we have just learned, he wrote between 1590 and 1613. And so his first plays began in 1594, so very close to the end of his writing career. And the first tragedy was Titus Andronicus. That was the first play that they performed and then printed out. Now, this appeared in a small, cheap pamphlet. So, the first printed work of Shakespeare was the tragedy of Titus Andronicus, or that was the title of the book. And this book was printed in a very small, cheap pamphlet. Cheap pamphlet because, of course, he is beginning life, and so he couldn't afford to go to the big journals. I mean, just like a local musician, a local artist starting up, you start in some small kiosk. And this small pamphlet, which was cheap, the material was not too executive, let me put it that way, was what they called the quarto, because of the way it was printed, quarter of something. So it's really just like in the newspapers, if you don't have money, they put you at a small corner of the graphic for an advert. If you have money, they give you one third of it. If you are very rich, they give you the full page. So the quarto was where Shakespeare's first play was printed. 18 of Shakespeare's plays had appeared in the quarto editions by the time of his death in 1616. So it tells you when Shakespeare died. In 1616, Shakespeare died. And 18 of his plays got printed in this quarto because of the outreach that he wanted to get to, or the number of people he wanted to reach, and also the cost involved. Another three of his plays were printed in the quarto before 1642, so even after his death, some more were still printed in the quarto. Good. Now, in 1613, the Globe burned down, and in the same year, Shakespeare retired from London theatre world and returned to Stratford. The Globe was actually the biggest theatre in Shakespeare's time in London. And then that is where most of the plays were performed. It's like the hub, if you want to put it, like the national theater of our time. So it got bent down. So that is where they make their trade. That is where they earn their living. So when it got bent down, he had to retire to Stratford. And he stayed there until he died on 23rd April 1616 and was buried in the Holy Trinity Church where he had been baptized 52 years earlier. So where he was baptized there and then he was buried there on 23rd April 1616, where he began his life in the same place he ended it so nicely. Now let's look at some of the collection of Shakespeare's works. Like we said earlier, the first collection, when we say collection, it means that a pool. I mean, you bring them together. It's like a DJ mix of song. You bring them together. So we realized from the beginning that most of the books were printed individually in the quarto. But at the point, they decided, look, this man has written so many books. Why don't you put all together in one location so that people can have access to them? So the first collection, edition of Shakespeare's plays, the first folio, so we call it the first folio, was collated and published in 1623. 7 years after his death. So 7 years after his death, I mean, these works of Shakespeare were put into a collection. But the question is, who superintended or supervised the printing of this collection? Now, of the 36 plays or 37 plays in the first folio, 18 had not yet been printed at all. So it tells us that in the first folio, 36 plays of Shakespeare were put into that collection. But the good thing is that out of these 36 plays, 18 of them had not yet been printed at all. It means that at the point that Shakespeare was dying, 18 of these plays were not printed. It is a fact that makes the first folio so important. So apart from what people already knew, 18 new editions were added to this first folio. That was very important. Without it, so out of these 18 which were added after Shakespeare, it means that Shakespeare wrote them down before his death. So he was hoping to perform them at the Globe probably before he printed them. Unfortunately, the Globe got bent and they had to retire and he went back home. So without this first folio and the addition of these 18 new books, we would have had access to 12th Night of Shakespeare, Measure for Measure, Macbeth, Julius Caesar, and The Tempest might never have survived. So all of these books came up later, posthumously. It means that they were printed after Shakespeare's death. Now, the text was actually collated by two of Shakespeare's fellow actors. So his fellow actors and friends. So it tells you basically that in life you need to choose friends who can hang on with your legacy. In fact, they even make it better. Don't follow people who can only benefit from you, and once you are off the scene in 2 days they forget about you. So this first folio was the job and work of Shakespeare's fellow actors. Shakespeare was an actor himself, and also his friends John Hemming and Henry Condell. These two people edited and supervised the printing of the first folio and ensured that these 18 new manuscripts that Shakespeare had written down were actually added so that it will make the collection a historical one. Now, the plays of Shakespeare were divided into comedies, like we said earlier, tragedies, histories, and an editorial decision has come to shape out of Shakespearean canon. So, all his plays put together were put into three main domains: the comedies, the tragedies, and the history. So read about them. Basically, what do Shakespeare comedies? What are some of them? The tragedies. What do they talk about? In particular, the histories. What do they also deal with? Try and find out. Now there is the last part that I want us to look at, which is what I want to call Shakespeareophobia. I mean, the fear of Shakespeare. As soon as people hear we are going to do studies in Shakespeare, they say, "Whoa, Shakespeare! Can you really read and understand Shakespeare?" and all of that. And the reason is basically very simple, because of the language of the time and the language of now. You know, one characteristic of language is that it grows, it develops, it evolves. And so new words come, new changes occur. And so sometimes reading in different time spaces, I mean, Shakespearean time and now, certainly there is a big gap. So the languages have changed, and of course we want to keep the original script so they can change what Shakespeare wrote then to suit our time. So we will have to get to understand and appreciate much better what happened then. So understanding Shakespearean language, for many, like I said, is the biggest barrier to understanding Shakespeare, mostly literature. When they say literature without Shakespeare, well, it's baseless. So when you get to understand how they wrote, the kind of words they used and what they meant, then when you are reading, you really understand it. And I'm very sure when you started reading Much Ado About Nothing, you came across these hitches. I mean, it slows down your pace, breaks your understanding, and sometimes weakens your morale as you read on, because you seem to be reading something that you really don't know what the words mean. You just try to conjecture. Now, perfectly competent performers can be paralyzed with fear. In fact, I want to say perfectly competent readers like you can be paralyzed with fear when they see bizarre words like methinks, peradventure, something we call Shakespeareophobia. I mean, fear of Shakespeare's language, fear of Shakespeare words, and fear of Shakespeare's style of writing. As a way of trying to counter this natural anxiety, it is important that we often begin, like before we start the book of formally. I mean, we started reading, but that is informal. But formally, we want to get you to learn some of the new language and what they actually mean. It is more like listening to a strong accent of your ear. Soon you adjust to the dialect. Now let's look at some of the Shakespearean phrases. Even if you are confused about some of the words, sometimes we spoke about context. Sometimes you need to look at the context, the words that come before that particular word that you find very difficult to understand, or the words that come after. And sometimes so you also use what we call visual signals. Who are the characters around? What is the theme? What is the content of what is being said? And what do you think this word that is used that you have never seen, what does it relate to? So basically it says you don't really need to have a dictionary by your side. You don't need to keep a dossier of all these new vocabulary or these new words of Shakespearean era in your mind. You just need to look at the context, look at the visual cues of the visual signals that are used within the point where the particular word is used. Now, and it is easy to do that because, like in your language acquisition lessons that you've learned in education and English, you would have learned that children acquire language sometimes more complex than this. So why not? You can equally do same. Now, what you need to understand, the same is true of Shakespeare, and the best antidote to Shakespeareophobia is to sit back, relax, and listen to the text spoken and perform. Basically, one thing about reading Shakespeare drama, I mean, from our initial lessons in the previous semesters, you would have learned that we said that drama is best appreciated when it is what? Performed. while poetry is appreciated when it is what? Recited. So if you want to really enjoy Shakespearean book, when you are reading, you're quiet and please read it aloud. Listen to yourself, and that way you will get to understand. And it is really very, very helpful to do so. Now let's pick out the first word. In most of Shakespearean writings, you come across words like thee, thou, thy, and thine. Basically, all these four means two things: you and your. So, so if I say thy house, it means your house. Okay, where are thine? Where are you? You know, all of that. So you and your, actually these words are commonplace in his place, and you always come across them. However, he also uses the words thee and thou instead of you, and the word thy, thine instead of your. So when you see thee or thou, it means you. Okay. Um, what are thee? Who are you? You know, that kind of thing. And then thine. This is thine. Is this yours? Okay, so all of that. So you need to understand each time you see thee or thou, it symbolizes or it stands for you. And when you see thy or thine, it means your. Get the differences. Now, so sometimes he uses both them interchangeably. So both you and thy in the same speech. This is simply because the Tudor England of where Shakespeare was staying or their time, the older generation said thee and thy to denote a status or reverence for authority. So when the two co-occur, it means that it is used as a polite marker to indicate reverence or respect for whoever is being addressed. And certainly it was not for commoners. This was for people of the upper class, people of the royalty, that these were combined, I mean, to make it look worthier and then more beautiful, if you like, to embellish the language well for them. Okay. So you realize that even in language there is discrimination. Of course, you will know that there's a difference between to kill somebody and to assassinate, isn't it? So when you kill an ordinary person, they say that you have killed the person. But if somebody tries the life of the president, they'll say that they try to assassinate. So both means to take away the life of someone, but one, I mean, is higher. All animals are equal, and then some are more equal than what others. So therefore, when addressing a king or an old elderly person, thou and thy would be used, leaving the newer you and your for more informal occasions. So basically, that's what we're trying to say. Now, there is also, you'll come across art. What art thou? Who are you? So the art, A-R-T, means are. So a sentence, thou art, means you are. Thou art means you are. We already learned about thou, which means you. And then the art means are. So one is the pronoun, the other is the verb. So it's simple. So AY simply means yes. So my lady simply means yes, my lady. So you come across most of these words in Shakespearean writings. And then would means wish. Would means wish. Don't get confused. So although the word wish does appear in Shakespeare, so there is a word wish is there. Like when he says in Romeo and Juliet, which we will look at, I wish I were a cheek upon that hand. So we often find would used instead. For example, I would I were, which means I wish I were, I would. So when you see would in Shakespearean texts, understand that it means wish and not the same would as you and I are conversant with. Give me leave to. Give me leave to means allow me to. To give me leave to simply means allow me to do something. Give me leave to go, allow me to go. Give me leave, allow me to go. All right. Now, another word that you might come across very often is alas. It is a very common word that isn't used today, but very prevalent in Shakespearean time, and it simply means unfortunately. But in modern English, of course, that exact equivalent isn't there. So, alas, this is bone of my bone is not the same. But when you say in Shakespearean English, alas, it means that unfortunately she died. Alas, she died. Unfortunately, she died. And then they have adieu. So you come across, especially when two characters are in a dialogue and one says adieu, it means goodbye, it means that it's about to leave. And then there is one very close to adieu, it also means exeunt. It's a Latin word, exeunt, E-X-E-U-N-T. Exeunt means to go, to go. So exit is one. Exeunt means many more, two or more characters are leaving the stage. But if it is one character, of course, it will be exit. So we have exeunt and we have exit. And then they also have Sirrah. Sirrah means Sir or Mr. It's a title. Sir or Mr. So when you come across this in Shakespearean text, don't be worried, it means that. And then you have words that have the suffix. In other words, they end with ETH. Sometimes the endings of Shakespearean words sound alien. So, and once they end the same way, it means the same as modern words that we have. So if I say speaketh, it simply means to speak. Sayeth means to say, taketh. So forget the suffixes and pick as we use them in modern times. So when I say speaketh, it means that to speak, basically. So you don't need to strain yourself. So it's very good you get to understand these things and keep them in your mind as you read the text. Now, don't, do, and did. A key absent from Shakespearean English is don't. So they don't use don't, they will use do and did. Okay, a key absence from Shakespearean English, you don't easily, you ought not, you use ought not, you do not have to. Okay, now, so if you said don't be afraid, in Shakespearean time they wouldn't use don't because it wasn't there in their time. So you say don't be afeared or be not afeared. Be not, they'll use the auxiliary form to be, the verb to be. Okay, so be not afeared. So be not afeared basically means don't be afraid. So the be not, they will not use don't, but they will say be not, which means don't be. And then afeared is the same as afraid in their time. So where today we will say don't hurt me, Shakespeare will say hurt me not. They will not say don't hurt me. So basically they find ways to avoid the use of don't. So the words do and did were also uncommon. So rather than saying what did he look at, Shakespeare would say what looked he like. What did he look like? You say what looked he like. So there is an inversion. It's sort of did he stay long? All right. Okay. Instead of saying did he stay long, Shakespeare will say stay she long, stayed she long, instead of saying did she stay long. So they do and they don't, they found a way of avoiding them, so they used a lot of inversion. And this difference accounts for the unfamiliar word order in some of Shakespearean sentences that you would come across. It is important to note at this point that we have been talking about that Shakespeare was alive. Okay, when Shakespeare was alive during his time, language was in a state of flux. When we say it's in a state of flux, it means that it was in a state of evolving, developing, growing, and many modern words were being integrated into the language for the first time. So a lot of things were coming in from the Greek, from Latin, from French, and all of them. So there was an influx, there was a lot of words coming, so they have to economize. When we put too many words in a language at a time, you get it so bloated and becomes difficult to learn as a language going forward. Shakespeare himself coined many new words and phrases. Shakespeare language is therefore a mixture of the old and the new. Very, very important. Now, so as you watch this, if you have any questions on what we have said so far as an introduction to Shakespeare, we will put it on the platform and then we will all have a discussion of it. Very, very important. And make sure you ask your questions. And after that, we'll do this peer evaluation. You still post on the platform any 3 things that you learned from today's lesson, personal observation, not just on the slides, but on the presentation as well. Good things and the suggestions for improvement. That will also help. And then you will also make a 2-minute video of yourself sharing the challenge you anticipate in reading the required text and how you plan to overcome them. 2 minutes video, not more than 2 minutes. And then you upload it onto the platform for all of us to watch. And then after you upload, we will all have a discussion of that. And so in our next lesson, we will be looking at the concept and relevance of comedy, then and now, and with particular reference to Much Ado About Nothing. And then you also look at the stages of the plot. This is a revision because in our last semester when we're looking at the drama, we look at the stages of the plot, the exposition, the rising action, the climax. So we'll revise over that because I will try to find out how much you still remember about the stages of the plot, and we'll apply this information, this knowledge to the text that we are reading, Much Ado About Nothing, and we should be able to tell the exposition of the plot in Much Ado About Nothing, the rising action, what is the suspense, okay, and what is the conflict, what form of conflict is it, what is the climax, and so on and so forth. And then we'll look at basically the plot of Much Ado About Nothing. So having learned about the stages of the plot, we will represent this on the plot chart. So that you take the text Much Ado About Nothing and tell us the exposition is this, the rising action is this, fueled by this, conflict fueled by this, suspense, this is the climax, and everything. So we'll try to link that. And then we'll share a summary of the scenes of the book, and each of us will do a summary and then upload the text onto the platform for us to hold a discussion. Okay, so thank you very much, and then have a nice day. See you on the platform as we put our questions and our concerns. Bye bye, and see you.